Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bake Along series where I share a recipe in front of you as much in real time as I can. And today's recipe is something perfect for a wintry day. If you live in a cold climate, it's also just perfect, and it's a very Canadian recipe. I am making Nanaimo bars, not just regular everyday Nanaimo bars. These are my hot chocolate Nanaimo bars. Nanaimo bars really are a Canadian classic, and they get their name after the city in British Columbia on Vancouver Island, Nanaimo, where they were invented about, probably 50 years now. But they are a staple. If you go into any Canadian style bakery, you'll see Nanaimo bars on display. You know what? For that matter, you would see them in a coffee shop too, and they are a decadent sweet treat. The nice thing about Nanaimo bars, you don't need to turn on the oven. You've got 3 layers, a chocolate base layer, a creamy custardy filling, and then a chocolate layer on top. And you can all assemble it in one go and without turning on the oven. So let me start with the base. Now you do need to use the stovetop a little bit because I have to melt some butter with a little bit of sugar and some cocoa powder. I normally have Dutch processed cocoa powder on hand. I tend to use that in my cake baking. I develop my cake recipes to work with Dutch processed cocoa powder. But when it comes to a recipe like this, whatever you have on hand works fine. You can use Dutch or you can use conventional because there's no leavening or reaction with other ingredients happening. I'll add my little bit of salt. And now I'm going to head over to my water bath. So just a pot with an inch of simmering water and just let it melt. And in fact, there's nothing to do right now. There's nothing sensitive or that can be overcooked at this point. We're just looking to melt the butter to create the mixture, but I do have to add an egg to it and cook that out for a minute. So you just take 1 egg, break it in a dish and give it a little whisk because you're going to add that directly to the hot base. And so you don't want the egg white separated from the yolk because egg whites cook at a faster rate than yolks. So by whisking up the egg, it'll go in quickly. And honestly, it takes 30 seconds to cook the egg. It's such a small mixture. I'm just going to take a look here. My butter's starting to melt. It will combine with the cocoa powder and the sugar. And while that keeps happening, I've got my pan ready. So I've taken a 9-inch square pan. I grease the pan lightly, but it's really just to get the parchment paper to stick. And then I've got the parchment paper cut so that it lines the bottom and comes up the sides. And you'll see in the corners that I have the corners cut. So then I cut the larger size. So this is really about a 12-inch square. And you cut the corners so then they overlap when they get pressed into the pan. So really you won't get any filling. If you're making something like a lemon square, it's a great thing to do. You won't get that softer, more fluid filling leaking either underneath the parchment paper or underneath the crust itself. How's my butter doing here? It's coming along. Starting to soften up. So this turns into just sort of a sloppy, chocolatey mess right now. I'm gonna turn my heat down a little bit. Oh, that butter's melting quickly now. The metal bowl is nice and hot. And so now that I've got some heat in there, once you know your butter's melted, you know your mixture's hot enough. And this is a fun part. You can tell when your egg is cooked because it's going to turn into, it's kind of sloppy looking now. When I add the egg, it will look terrible at first, but you keep cooking it until it looks like a really rich chocolate pudding. So in goes the egg. And see how it looks terrible at first. Just stay with me. Keep whisking. And now it's going to start thickening up. It's starting already. And it comes together into this smooth, glossy mix. See that consistency? That's where I know the egg is cooked already and it comes off the heat. Beautiful. So it really does look like a really dark chocolate pudding. So now I'll switch to a spatula, and to make this a substantial base, if you have a classic square, quite often it can be a graham cracker crust or a shortbread base. So what I do is stir graham cracker crumbs into this chocolate mixture. And so it's going to turn rich and dark and chocolatey. And this is traditional to a Nanaimo bar. If you're new to this style of square, this is abiding by the original recipe, the graham crackers. If you don't have graham crackers or graham cracker crumbs, pulsed digestive biscuits would work well. You could also use a Biscoff or gingerbread cookie, and that would work well too. And now, traditional to a Nanaimo bar is often walnut pieces into the crust. Coconut is also an acceptable option. So I'm adding coconut to this because I find it matches with the hot chocolate flavors I'm going for with this Nanaimo bar. And so while everything is still warm and soft, I'll stir in the coconut. This is sweetened flaked coconut. You could use unsweetened just as easily. It's a very sweet bar, I will let you know. It is decadent that way. But I do find the pre-sweetened flaked coconut is a little more tender in a recipe like this. The unsweetened has more of a coarse texture to it, and I like the softer consistency, especially when it comes time to slice these bars. All right, now I'm ready to put this in my pan and press it into a nice level layer. So remember, the egg is now cooked. There is nothing left to cook in this recipe other than melting some chocolate for the top. So it's easy and pliable right now while it's soft. These are the kind of squares that transport well. If anyone's a skier, it's that kind of thing when you need that little bit of a sugar to push you through in the middle of winter. It's such a wintry treat. I always identify Nanaimo bars with winter. It's one of those, it's akin to a candy bar, really, let's be honest here. That quick little sugar rush. Stores well. You chill them to set the squares, but you don't have to keep them refrigerated. So at this point, you can start working on the filling right away. If your fridge is nearby, just pop this in the fridge while you're working on the filling. And that's what I'm going to do next. The filling layer, this is just textbook to a Nanaimo bar, is typically butter, icing sugar, and custard powder. The packaged custard powder. Now you know me, I always make pastry cream from scratch. And so the only reason I have custard powder in my pantry is to make Nanaimo bars. And I think I'm not alone. If you're Canadian and you're watching, and do you make Nanaimo bars and do you have that custard powder? You know the tin, it's blue and red and it has a little yellow on it. Do you actually use it? One time I did go in and check my pantry. I cleaned out my pantry and I finally got rid of my old tin of custard powder because it had long gone past date because it has that one use. So it's like a little bit like making an American buttercream frosting because I've got my butter and I've got 1.5 cups of icing sugar measured here. I'm gonna add about a cup and cream it. But I don't want you to use electric beaters because I don't want to make an aerated fluffy frosting like you have on top of a cupcake. This needs to be a little more dense so that you can slice the Nanaimo bars into nice squares. If it's too fluffy, the chocolate layer will sink and crack, and then you won't get nice tidy slices. So just take a second to smooth this out. You can tell it's a cooler day here. My butter is a little cooler. Maybe that's why I like making these in the winter time. The ingredients aren't too soft and this sets up quickly. You get to slicing really fast. Okay, we're almost there. Just one more stir. The next ingredient I'm adding is liquid, and that makes this frosting much easier to handle. So you can see it's quite dense, nothing fluffy and light like an American buttercream. But now it's time for the flavor and liquid. So this is the custard powder, which once you liquefy it, turns a yellow color, and that's the signature original Nanaimo bar. But I am, instead of adding extra icing sugar, I have a little more to add. I'm actually adding hot chocolate mix. So this isn't just cocoa powder like I used on the base. Take a pre-mixed, good quality hot chocolate mix and you've got that great balance of sweet and chocolate, and it makes this frosting taste like a mug of hot chocolate. But you know what? For me to call it a Nanaimo bar, I have to add the custard powder too. You can't leave that out in my book. And I'll add a couple tablespoons of milk. Oh, see, you can see that yellow color that comes out of the custard powder. And a little bit of salt to offset the sweetness. And I'll just give this a little stir. I do this, the first time I made this recipe with the hot chocolate mix, I just added it dry to my butter, and the granules of hot chocolate mix didn't dissolve. So you really need to take a second and stir your custard powder and hot chocolate mix together, and it helps dissolve that sugar mixture. Okay, I'll bring my butter mixture back. I'm gonna add, I'll do it in 2 additions, just so it blends smoothly. And I don't end up with any butter lumps in my Nanaimo frosting. It turns a lovely hot chocolatey color. Now I can add the rest. Just checking I still have a little heat in case I need to soften up my chocolate for the topping. So the rest of this hot chocolate mix with the custard powder is in. So it really gives the Nanaimo bar, when you use the custard powder, a custard-like tasting to the filling without actually cooking a custard. There. So this is now too soft, which is why I have the remaining bit of icing sugar built into the recipe. So this will tighten up a little bit, but still be spreadable. I think I associate Nanaimo bars with skiing because when I was a teenager and used to ski occasionally, it was the go-to snack. Someone always had to bring Nanaimo bars on the ski trip. Okay, so now let me just tidy up my little chocolate drops here. We've got our pan back. So even though this layer, the base layer, didn't go in the fridge because it's just a little bit out of reach for me here, you can still spread the frosting and not worry about pulling up that base layer. So this gets spread to cover right into the corners. I haven't done a chocolate dessert in a while. It feels good to make a little chocolate treat, especially this time of year. Take a little care to make it level because there's only one more layer to go on top. Just a little melted chocolate layer. Oh, well, and of course, what do you put on your hot chocolate? Marshmallows. Here we go. All right, now to save time, I have melted my chocolate. I hope you don't mind. So this is chocolate with just a little bit of butter. If you melt it, you can tell it is a chilly day because I'm gonna pop this over the heat just to melt it a little bit more. I melted that right before we started rolling and it is already in that time set up a little bit. But the reason I add a little bit of butter to the chocolate as this topping is if you melt just straight chocolate and you try and cut your Nanaimo bars, the top chocolate layer will definitely crack and you'll lose that precision when you cut your squares. Also, when you eat it, it's nice to have that little bit of butter. It just softens the chocolate a little bit. So I'm just making sure it's nice and soft and spreadable. There, that's all it needed. Just a second. Dry off the bottom of my bowl so no chocolate drops get in my chocolate. So if you are making this at home, I had the chocolate melted and ready, so I melted it over the same water bath. You could pop your squares with the frosting in the fridge. So just giving it 10 minutes to chill while you measure and melt your chocolate means it will be easier to spread without melting your frosting. But it's a pretty stable frosting. As you can see, I'm having no trouble spreading it even without chilling it. Just a nice sheer layer. Makes it easier to pick up and eat. And not traditional, but I think we know how delicious a little flaked sea salt could be on top. Just a little bit to balance out the sweetness. I leave that up to you if you want to leave that out. If you're making this for a holiday dessert, you could put crushed up candy canes on top. That would be delicious. Even put a little peppermint in the filling. But to make this a hot chocolate Nanaimo bar, of course, we have to put some marshmallows on top. So while the chocolate's still melted, just some mini marshmallows in a single layer, because only the ones that come in contact with the chocolate will stick on, of course. You might lose a couple as you're slicing, but a nice even layer. There we go. And these take about 2 hours to set in the fridge to give the chocolate, the filling, and the base time to chill. And when you're all done, they kind of look exactly the same, but they pop out of the pan really easily. Peel away that parchment. And then I leave it up to you if you wish to trim the edges or not. I don't think you have to. And your portioning can depend on who you're feeding and how. But these are meant to be an easy pick up to eat square. So So you can see inside those beautiful layers and the texture of the coconut. Should I go in rectangle bars? I think I will. So I'm gonna do 4 by 6. And aren't those just the most adorable? I know you can whip these up in no time. You are such good bakers. And what a great loyal following you are. I love these little bake-alongs because I know you use my recipes. I work hard to test them, and it means so much when you write in the comments how you've made this recipe and how you've made it your own. So I've turned a traditional Canadian treat, Nanaimo bars, into my own hot chocolate Nanaimo bars with hot chocolate mix and marshmallows, and I look forward to what you add to your own. Now, while all the hot chocolate flavor is built into one of these, I strongly recommend a glass of cold milk as opposed to hot chocolate with these, just to offset the sweetness. Oh yeah. That's a Nanaimo bar. You do get that custard flavor. And you can see how cleanly they slice by adding that little bit of chocolate, a little bit of butter to the chocolate. It makes such a difference. I thank you once again for joining me for another fantastic bake-along recipe, and I'll be back very soon with a new one. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. I do like the coconut in there.